Great. Great. Thank you for joining today for Global Learning Beyond Borders. This is really intended to be a conversation, faculty with a partner, World Strides, represented by Brittany Weiscarver and her colleague here, Sam. So I want to take a quick minute. Brittany has been working with World Strides for about five years as the Senior Program Development Manager, responsible for creating custom programs. She's a graduate of the University of Virginia and an econ major, and has studied herself and lived abroad, both as an English teacher in India, teaching actually math and English.
That was the most challenging part.
In India, and living in Nepal and traveling throughout Europe and Africa. So what we're hoping to do today is really talk about some of the benefits of global learning and global programming in the context of the current challenges and some of the barriers to travel during this period of time. Hoping to discuss and talk through some of the alternative options or ways to emphasize global learning and maintain that consistency in the curriculum when travel isn't as feasible.
Awesome. Thanks, Marissa. Yes, teaching math in India was definitely the hardest challenge. Explaining what addition is in another language is always complicated, let alone explaining what addition is in English. I learned that very quickly, but I really appreciate you inviting us in here to kind of share some information on alternatives to travel, given the current kind of state that we're in, and to really, like Marissa said, facilitate an open discussion and chat a little bit more just about what these alternatives can look like. I think that there's some really great ideas out there, and then there's ways that we can kind of tailor them so that they're specific to what the needs are. So talking initially, I think everyone on this call values global learning to some extent, and knowing that, you know, students are forever changed by an international experience, whether it's the specific country that they go to being very different from what they experience in the US, to just being able to leave their hometown. For some students we work with, they're first generation college students, never left the state that they live in, first time on a plane, and all of that is a whole new experience for them too. And it's getting them out of their comfort zone and teaching them to be more aware of who they are as an individual, but then who that individual is in the larger part of society and other cultures. And so at World Strides, we really value being able to help students understand not just what they may have explicitly learned in another country, but those soft skills that they gain abroad, understanding how they can cultivate those in an international experience, and then really tailor that to their career in an interview or a resume, preparing them to kind of set themselves apart in that market that has proven to be very challenging for a lot of recent grads. So when we talk about this and we think about global learning and its importance, we kind of are faced with a lot of challenges with COVID and travel restrictions, health and safety concerns, and looking at, okay, if we can't actually travel to another country, what are the alternatives that we have? The main one that I'm going to focus on today is going to be on virtual programming, and how to also incorporate that into maybe some of your academic goals or things to think about so that you can bring global learning and global leadership into your curriculum. The second one that I won't focus on as much, but is also looking at domestic programming. I think that just as an initial side, domestic programming is a really great resource that we maybe don't think of when we're talking about global leadership or international competencies, because it is within the US. But something that I've learned kind of through this pandemic is that there are a lot of things that students can garner from traveling within the US that can give them an international perspective when they look at it from a compare and contrast aspect. So, for example, I worked on a program that was looking at psychology and sustainable development in Iceland. Sorry, my dog's here. One of the aspects of that is they couldn't travel to Iceland because of COVID restrictions. And so the way that we approached that was having them travel to out towards the west, looking at, national parks and how are they making them sustainable, comparing and contrasting that, because those are really based on tourism as well, and comparing and contrasting what they're doing to what the tourism industry is happening in Iceland. We've looked at comparing and contrasting issues with race and gender identity, for looking at Southern states versus, cultures in Africa. And how does that relate? How is that translated? Challenging students to maybe look within their local community and how are international populations represented in the areas that are around them. And so those are some of the ways that we've really looked at domestic programming. Another one, for example, that we worked on was having students go to New York City, and they spent a week focused on Chinatown and Chinese culture in the US. And then they spent a second week in Little Italy and in Italian culture in the US. And they were able to compare and contrast to their hometown, what their perception was of Chinese culture and Italian culture abroad, and then how that kind of was translated and influenced there. So looking at getting creative, I think, has been really the key in COVID, in the world of COVID. The other aspect, and this is something that I will share my screen for here. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect. So the other aspect is virtual programming. So I think that virtual programming has definitely posed a lot of pros and cons, and the world of virtual has kind of been forced into everybody's forefront, given kind of the state that we're in. And thinking about this, we definitely recognize that virtual programming is not here to replace travel. Nothing is going to quite be like sitting at a coffee shop in Paris, sipping a coffee, people watching and seeing, different individuals walk by. However, because we can't do that right now, we're looking at ways to really incorporate that for students in the environment that they're in. One way, so there's two aspects that we approach this with. First is the cultural piece, and how can we give them some cultural exposure? And then the second is academic piece, and how can we bring in some academic components into this so that the students also feel like they're getting that kind of core knowledge that they would abroad. So starting from the cultural aspect here, these are just some examples that we have incorporated into recent programs. So that's doing an introductory language course with someone abroad, so they're getting kind of that cultural exposure to learning the language. Doing a city tour or a museum tour. So if there's certain sites that we want students to dive deeper into, giving them, we do it typically with like a GoPro or something like that, but getting them more of that in-depth view rather than just looking at pictures on the internet. And the guide can talk through them about what is the artwork that they're seeing, giving them more of that background information about the history behind a specific structure, things in that regard. One of my favorites is doing a virtual cooking class. One of the reasons why I love this, it's actually multifold. One, I'm a foodie, so anything involving food is great. But outside of that, part of what we do in this is where we challenge students to go out into their community. So yes, they're seeing someone virtually that's abroad, that's teaching them how to cook a traditional dish. But prior to that, we give them the shopping list. We're having students, hey, maybe don't go to your normal grocery store. Maybe see if there is a more Italian focused grocery store or, a more Asian focused grocery store that you can go to get some of these ingredients, so that they're getting that exposure in their local community. So it's getting students to kind of think about the culture there too. We also do dance classes, which are super fun. So like learning a traditional flamenco dance in your bedroom or something like that, that can be really fun. And then we also look at the economic overview. And part of that includes, how has the country been affected by COVID? How are they responding? How are they transitioning? And really giving the students that lay of the land. So those are kind of some of the cultural aspects that we incorporate. We, of course, can do others if there's more specific sites or tours that you want to see. But these are kind of some of those top ones there. From an academic perspective, this is something that I really love, because we've really focused on trying to have this be less of another Zoom lecture and more of an interactive opportunity for students. So one of the things that I value a lot is the virtual team building. My younger sister, is a sophomore at Radford University in Virginia. And one of her biggest struggles this past semester has been that everything's been online. She hasn't been able to connect with her classmates. She hasn't made friends like she typically does. And it's been a real struggle for her. And so the fact that we have incorporated virtual team building is really near and dear to my heart because I know the benefit of that. So this aspect gets students into an environment where they're broken out into smaller groups, and it's essentially like a virtual escape room of sorts, but they're challenged to solve puzzles, and it helps them think about what are their problem solving skills? How do they communicate with one another? How does a group interact to come to a common end goal, and making it competitive, beat the other team, which we know students love that too. And so it really gets them to build these relationships, and it also helps them work on their soft skills. Thinking back to kind of their career readiness, we talked to them about that, about this is the soft skill development that you're going to be looking at, be working on. What did you learn through that? There's definitely a reflection period of how could you maybe have communicated better? What are your takeaways from this? How would you maybe adjust for next time, so that they're able to take that and translate that into that growth piece for themselves as an individual. We also have a social impact exchange, which this is focused on kind of that nonprofit arena. So this is working with an international nonprofit, giving the students an opportunity to understand what the organization stands for, how they help other communities, and then, what they're doing now, maybe if they've pivoted or transitioned in some way. This one, we also look to try to see if there is a local nonprofit that students could then get involved in around the university. So thinking about, okay, this is what a nonprofit is doing in Tanzania. Here's one that actually has very similar mission values in your local community. Maybe you can get involved there. Talking to them about those pieces and looking about how they can still give back and make an impact in a specific area, even if it isn't abroad. And then finally, we have our executive session, our guest lecture. This is something we can, of course, incorporate for you. So the example that I use is that we worked with an art history professor, and she focused on 3 main countries. So Italy, France, and Germany for her art history course. She had great connections in Italy and France and 0 connections in Germany. And this is something where we were able to come in and really just help support her from a virtual perspective by bringing in German speakers on art history. So that was something that it didn't have to be an intensive week. It could be something that we did later on in the semester, or 1 speaker a month throughout the semester, so that it aligns with the academic curriculum. I've talked to a lot of faculty about looking at how to maybe incorporate sustainable development goals that have come out into their curriculum. So that way they're still putting in these goals that are internationally focused throughout what they're teaching students, and students are still getting that international exposure. And that's something that we can help support in bringing those goals to life throughout the semester for you, through those guest lectures and things like that. We do have opportunities that are a little bit more intensive, like something we call a strategy challenge, where students are actually working with an organization for several weeks on a particular problem, and they actually present back a deliverable. So students are broken up into smaller groups. Here's the problem. How would you solve it based off of what you've learned in your course? And then you present back to that company. And that is something that we really love, because students can put that on a resume. They can say, I worked with Johnson & Johnson in Germany to solve X problem, and this was the result. And it's something that they can talk about in an interview setting, about how they've had that exposure and experience as well. All of these are really focused on bringing goals to life in the current setting that we're in. Again, this is not meant to replace travel by any means. I think looking further down the line, this is something that I've talked to a lot of other institutions about. This is how we enhance travel. I think virtual is here to stay. And by enhancing that, what I mean is helping students feel more prepared before they go, giving them, kind of letting them get their feet wet a little bit, if you will, by doing some of that, language exposure or speaker exposure, so they have some background on what the culture looks like before they travel, so that they feel more comfortable when they get there. So these are just opportunities to kind of think through. The other aspect of why I love virtual is that it can be very interdisciplinary and you're not tied to one country. So by looking at it from a virtual perspective, you could be learning about South Africa in 1 week, and 2 weeks later, we're talking about someplace in Europe. And then 2 weeks later, we're visiting South America. So there's just a lot of opportunities for you to explore different regions of the world, doing compare and contrasting, seeing what country A is doing really well and how country B could improve, and how does the US fit in that. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and it can be very interdisciplinary as well. So looking at crossing different academic barriers and incorporating more pieces so that students are learning about global leadership and international development and things like that in something like a psychology course, so that those pieces are kind of crossed over throughout. The last aspect is I wanted to share some information on our Global Leadership series. This is a free series that we're offering to our partners, so you can utilize these speakers. We have a whole library, and I can send the information to Marissa. But this is something as kind of our commitment to showing the benefits of virtual. You're welcome to incorporate any of these speakers into your curriculum. Have students, watch some of them. They're all pre-recorded at this point because the times have passed, but this would give you an idea a little bit about what we're talking about, so you have some sense of some of the pieces that could be incorporated there. So with that, those are the two main aspects, domestic and then virtual, that we talk about as alternatives. But I wanted to kind of open the floor to questions, comments, thoughts, anything like that, and just kind of see where people are, maybe what it is that you're wanting to explore, and maybe how I can help you work through any ideas that you might have.
Maybe it would be helpful, I don't know, Dr. Lutz, you have a very long history of supporting students to study abroad, but Brittany doesn't know you very well. And so maybe introducing the discipline that you teach, and also some of your connections. I think one of the realities for me, being just a couple of years working at Oglethorpe, is there's a lot of history, and there's a lot of successful examples of long-term. I mean, I think Oglethorpe has, at least in my view, maintained a really strong commitment to seeing students abroad for a semester or more. We, just graduated a student who did a dual degree thanks to Dr. Lutz's efforts. So I think one of the realities for Oglethorpe is shifting and moving away from the travel component. The idea of the immersive study abroad really does counter what's really been valuable about study abroad at Oglethorpe over its history. And so I think, highlighting what you did about this not replacing, and this being something that could fuel or provide some scaffolding for students to better prepare them for a program, is great, but maybe some history around what has been happening would be helpful too.
Yes, well, I have been involved with, in particular, our partners with generally developing international partnerships, and we have a good many of them. Each of them sort of with their own particular characteristics. We are, I think, strangely enough, this surprised me, but I think we are one of the few French and Spanish programs in the country that requires a semester of study abroad in the target language for our majors. I meet ever so many French teachers who have not had that kind of experience in the target culture. When I talk to colleagues, especially here in Georgia, especially in the state system, they say, well, they can't require people to do that because it's expensive and so forth. So that is, but with our partnership with the Catholic University of Lille that has worked out very well, so that we have not a huge number, but regularly 3 to 4 of our students studying in Lille and students from Lille studying in Atlanta on our campus. And then they came up with an initiative that that Marissa was just mentioning, that has worked out better, kind of surprisingly, only just this past year. It's a dual degree program, which allows the students to, each university gives the students credit for the coursework they've already done in their home university. And in 1 year of study, they're able to complete a degree in the partner institution as well as their home degree. So we have a student who who graduated this year with a degree from Oglethorpe, but also a French licence. Given the regimentation of the French educational system, this is quite remarkable, and depends upon a lot of flexibility on the part of our partner. But what the flexibility isn't is that they can offer this only for one specific major. And so that's been our problem in the past, that I've had trouble getting students to be interested in a restricted program in terms of curriculum and a more extensive and more work. But we have a student who took on the challenge this year, and when the pandemic came, even stayed in France and worked online with the French students, and has been hired by our partner school to go back and work with the international students in Lille. So it's just really—
How exciting. I didn't know that piece.
Yes, yes. She also, I think, I don't know that we can ever, I don't know, I say, you know, we can't reproduce, we won't have students like this again, and then we get other students that are remarkable in other ways. But this student came in where she'd already done pretty much the French program, including study abroad in Paris, before she came to us. And then we have a stipulation about almost half the credits have to be at Oglethorpe. So I found myself with an MIZ with who basically could just take any course that she wanted. She met the requirements of the French major. Instead, we created a second independently planned major in French, focusing on translation, and she completed most of the requirements for that during an academic year at our partner school in Lille. Now, I don't know, you know, if we ever will have quite someone with quite that situation again, but that's worth mentioning. The other thing that I'll mention in terms of my own particular interests and experience is at some point way back in the, I've been at Oglethorpe since 1988. And in the mid-90s, I taught at our partner school in The Hague. I have an interest in Africa and French-speaking Africa, and developed a course with a colleague in Spanish that's called French and Spanish Crossroads in Africa. And as a result, decided I wanted to prepare myself by an experience in Africa, and have been in Senegal 2 times with a program run by former Peace Corps volunteers. And then my colleague is married to a Ghanaian and has all sorts of African experience. So
we're going to get to Ghana. It's going to happen.
And of course, he and I keep, you know, over the years, keep talking about how to do this. I think what I would say in terms of your presentation, the thing that caught my attention in particular was when you said that the remote online is not going to disappear and is going to influence us in the future. And I think that can be very positive um, and perhaps solve some problems that I've experienced over the years, which is, well, I recently got answered a questionnaire from the cultural services of the French embassy, which was very nice, asking about our program, but also about the influence of COVID, what could be possible, and just they were sort of searching out different ways of relating and helping. And one of the things they mentioned was having a partnership with a class in France. And this has come up, as you might expect, over the years many times, but being a small school with limited resources, you know, I can't get, I mean, you know, in the past, to make that really work, you'd need a classroom with cameras and also, and you know, technical staff and so forth. But all of us are putting that together out of necessity now, so that maybe some things are in place now. I think we've got a classroom on campus that people are using for preparing lectures, so that maybe that could be possible. Another problem is, I actually on the questionnaire said, they said, "Are you interested in that?" And I actually put no, because it's just been overwhelming in terms of organization. You know, I just haven't had the time to also, you know, you really need it requires the institution putting more resources, more resources into, you know, otherwise the
Program
poor professor
development.
is just there doing everything. And I'm not I'm not an IT person.
Right.
And maybe with all of this in place, maybe we would find ourselves with the means to do that kind of thing that hasn't been possible before. And it would be great if we could include not only the developed world that's got this technology, but also the developing world. And I'll conclude with just one thing about my experience in Senegal, which was I was there in 2010 and then in 2015. And what surprised me in both times were the lack of resources and technology in so many spheres, but enormous technology in others. Every Senegalese has a phone, right? We, as part of the program, we go to a remote village that has no running water, has no services of any kind. And the first thing you do in a village like that, of course, is to meet the chief, right? And so we went into the chief's home, and what happens? All of a sudden, we hear a telephone ring, and it's his son from Spain calling to connect with us and welcome us. So I just mentioned that as, you know, I think that there are really exciting things. And since you've worked in places like India and Africa, it seems like there are possibilities there which didn't exist before. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in some of those underrepresented or non-traditional, I guess would be the best way to say it, countries. Same thing in India. Everybody has a phone. Everybody has a phone and they're in constant contact. Like I would go out to some very rural villages and they still had cell phones. So it's really, it's quite interesting and an interesting dynamic for sure. But I think what you're describing is very similar to the COIL method of exchange, where, you know, students in the US are able to work alongside international students at another institution. And so making those connections, I mean, we have certainly had a lot of requests for that as well. And so we're happy to help if it is more of kind of that student interaction you're looking for and seeing how to facilitate that. I think that's really key, because then students are hearing from somebody that's on the same level as them, you know, similar age group, maybe studying similar things, and how is their experience different, even though the core of it is similar too.
So Ilya, you've been with us, or maybe not, but if you have anything that you wanted to share, I know you have a very extensive history of teaching and working abroad as well. And Ilya's relatively new to Oglethorpe in terms of teaching, but has been teaching as a faculty member on a partnership we have with Lead Abroad. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add in terms of experiences with virtual learning or experiences in any COIL exchange that you've participated in.
No, I just joined actually till I get a bigger picture of what's going on and understanding. So I've been here in spirit.
It wasn't to call you out, but thanks for joining in
Sure.
spirit and in full spirit.
Yeah.
Well, I reached out to all faculty, but the faculty that are in the majors that require study abroad. Obviously, there have been decisions that have had to be made for individual students nearing graduation. But my hope was to really initiate some conversation and dialogue around what are the things that we're already doing. Like Dr. Lutz said, he and Dr. Chandler have both been doing some things already with domestic learning and domestic programming without a lot of support. And so I think this conversation really was or having you participate and support this conversation was really to see what direction things could take, and maybe ask for some of those resources as the institution continues to work on strategic planning and changes continue to happen. I am curious. So Brittany, the leadership series that you referenced, so that was, I'm guessing, an effort that allowed you to sort of show the ways that virtual can connect students to different either topics or contemporary applications of their discipline.
Yeah, so it really started, so we started it when COVID first happened as a way to help support faculty that were kind of scrambling to figure out how to transition into virtual learning, and giving them some options that they could incorporate and take a little bit of the burden off of them. And then because we had such a great response, we continued with our second season, and that looked at different industries and how they have been impacted and transitioning due to COVID. And that was really there to show what, like you said, Marissa, what some of this virtual learning can look like, how the wide breadth of speakers and industries and topics that we can really cover, and give you an idea of how you can incorporate that into your curriculum.
Well, I definitely would love to take a look and see if there are, the spring classes are, scheduled and students are registering. And so if there are ways that I could share those with faculty to incorporate in the spring, there may be some interest in that, and then broadening that conversation about what might be next, or more custom things that might be down the road.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Great. Well, I'm going to stop the recording, I think.